Day 7. 0800 hours to 1200 hours. Bernice stirred. Her body ached, and she felt a weight across her chest and limbs. She opened her eyes. She was covered in a thin layer of dust. Her clothes had been burnt, and only rags covered her body. She remembered seeing Spike, realizing that he was still alive, and then, as it dawned on her that he planned to destroy the missile, Elle saw him too and started to shriek. His aim had been accurate. However, Bernice was confused. Why had the most powerful weapon ever created not done more damage? The roof of the courtyard had fallen in. Elle was crushed underneath the rubble. She was moving, but couldn't lift the slabs that had crashed down on her. The shape changer was sitting on the floor, staring into the air. He seemed to be in shock. Above them, the night sky seemed to be showing the first signs of a new morning. The apparition had disappeared, and there seemed a much calmer atmosphere. It reminded Bernice of walking through the countryside on Earth after a thunderstorm. There was an electric charge in the air, as if the land's natural batteries had been recharged. She thought of her childhood. She had been frightened of thunderstorms, and one night, as one tore across the countryside, possessing her with unimaginable terror, her mother had held on to her tightly and taken her outside to watch a multicoloured, incandescent light show. Her mother had held her. The spirit of wonder she'd always found in her father's stories was transformed into a sense of beauty to be found in the natural world. She'd had an unpleasant childhood, but there were good times she would always remember. Why should she remember that now? She felt a tear in her eye. Probably a speck of dust, she told herself. The hunters hovered 2 or 3 kilometres over the castle. An occasional hunter overcame the instincts of the pack and descended to the ruins. The explosion had frightened them, but they seemed to be working up their courage. As she stood, dusting down her body, she heard whistling. Someone was walking down the corridors of the castle. Was it not over yet? And then, as she listened, she recognized the discordant whistle. Ro-na-ro, 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 dee-dee-da-dee-dee, dee-dee-da-dee-dee-dee. It was a rough approximation of the sound of the engines of the TARDIS travelling across time and space. The Doctor often whistled the sound when his mind was embroiled in thought, or when playing chess and trying to distract her. He entered the room, and his eyes caught hers immediately. "I don't fancy the cleaning bill," he said to her. "Doctor!" Bernice shouted over to him. He walked to her. "We survived," he said, lightly tapping her on the head. She would have liked him to put his arm around her. She needed a hug. Someone to hold on to her and say it would be all right. It wouldn't come from the Doctor, though. She heard the sound of a voice following the Doctor down the corridor. "I just want to go home," it said. 2 men entered the room. The first was dressed in Georgian clothes. He was filthy, and the expression on his face looked as if he had seen enough to last a lifetime. The other man seemed incredibly old, dressed in robes and skullcap, and carrying a copy of the Yellow Standard which had been hanging up in the throne room. He looked around the room. He was searching for something. "What happened here?" the Doctor asked her. "Spike." "Spike?" he repeated. "One of the androids. I thought the shape changer had destroyed him. He was up there with a gun, and he shot at the missile. There was an explosion. I don't know why we weren't all killed." She had started to ramble. "Doctor, what is all this about?" As she spoke, the elderly man struggled across the room. He walked with a pronounced limp. He stood over Elle. "Help me, will you?" she said, trying to shift the weight off her body. "I can't move. I think I've broken a few bones. I can't feel my legs." The old man placed the standard on the floor. The expression on his face didn't change. He pulled the sword out of its sheath. It was a heavy, machete-type weapon which he held with great difficulty in one hand. I have never met you personally, but I met your masters a long time ago. Evil is so ostentatious. I monitored your associates and observed the murders. Your compatriots, the murderers, Mann and Brown, are dead. I don't know if I killed all of the followers, but it is over. No, you are too late. The shape-changer has opened the Well of Souls. She coughed, spluttered, and then was still. No, the hole has closed again. The power source and the machinery have been destroyed, the old man continued. Elle stared at him and didn't move. Bernice could see that she was dead, but this didn't stop the old man. He raised the sword above his head. Ai, kna, kopiaon lial amahajetsu, prentagoa vijtrak. Stop, the doctor shouted, realizing what was about to happen. Slay Iskaroth. The sword plunged down into the dead woman's neck. 3 blows separated the head from the body. Kopiaon tore the amulet from around his neck. For a few moments he held the amulet in his hand, looked at the design, and then threw it onto the dead body. Evil against evil, he said. Swarf had been sitting quietly, but this display frightened him. He ran out of the room. Although Bernice couldn't understand the savagery of the beheading, she knew that she couldn't let Swarf escape. She had a score to settle. He looked at her and began to transform into a small brown insect. Bernice watched with fascination as the body seemed to turn inside out. She recognized the creature as a flying cockroach. It flew up out of her reach. Bernice stopped. "Bastard!" she shouted. However, she was not the only one watching the shape-changer. A hunter swooped down towards the escaping insect. The shape-changer saw it, but its getaway was too slow, and it failed to transform. The hunter grabbed it in its claw, threw it into its mouth, and then ate it. "Checkmate," said Bernice. She turned back to her friend. She didn't feel like talking, but she needed some answers. "Doctor, why aren't we dead?" she asked. The doctor shrugged his shoulders. The Georgian was walking around in a circle. He seemed tired and drained. He had been looking at the mangled and burnt-out machinery. "The force of the explosion was directed at the other world," the doctor said eventually. "We just suffered the aftermath of the destruction of the machinery. But the effect on the other world must have been a holocaust," said the old man. "The other world?" Bernice looked puzzled. "Do you mind me asking what precisely is going on here? Who are you? I'm getting just a little tired of all this. I want something to eat. I want a good sleep." "I probably owe you an explanation," said the doctor. "Someday." "How about now?" she replied. "I think we had better be going," said the old man. "The hunters are starting to swarm now they have tasted blood." Bernice looked up. The hunters were gathering on the castle walls. They were framed against the morning sky, looking down at the 4 travellers. The creatures shuffled uneasily as they watched the activities going on in the ruined courtyard. The old man started to walk out of the ruin. The Georgian stood still. He seemed to be in shock. The doctor pushed him. "Come on, it's time to go home." The Georgian seemed to smile. "Be careful," said the old man. "Don't show that you're frightened." Bernice looked across at the doctor. "Is it over?" she asked, walking behind him. The doctor shrugged his shoulders. She kept sneaking a glance at the hunters. Their wings had started to beat faster, and they were showing an increasing interest in the goings-on in the ruins. 2 or 3 of the creatures were hovering above Elle's body. As the 4 travellers walked down the corridor, the mood of the hunters suddenly changed, and they began to attack the bloodied corpse. The sky, for a moment, was darkened by the gathering of the scavengers. Outside the castle, the morning sun was rising over the escarpment and casting long shadows across the plain. The Red Death was losing its grip on the vegetation. Life had returned to the world. The old man pointed towards the space station. "I will return you to your TARDIS," he said. "It is over then," repeated Bernice. He looked at her with eyes that penetrated to her soul. She didn't know who he was or where he was from, but she saw into his eyes. He shook his head. But it would make no difference, for she had seen into his eyes and knew his answer. No, this was only a skirmish. They will be back someday, and next time it will be full-scale war. This time they were only testing me, seeing if I was still strong enough to resist them. And I failed. The old man seemed terribly bitter. I showed that I would place one person's life above all else. "You saved my life," said the doctor. "Yes, and I said the consequences would be grave. I will have to prove that even alone, I, Kopian, Lial, and Mahajetsu, am prepared to stand up to them, whatever the cost." "I don't understand," said the doctor. "There is a bomb in orbit around this world. It has been triggered. In a few hours it'll detonate and obliterate this solar system," said Kopion. "What?" Bernice said. "You don't need to do this," said the doctor. Kopion shrugged. "How many will die?" Bernice asked. "Several million," said Kopion. "But that's monstrous," she continued. What would be monstrous would be the billions of people, the planets, the star systems, and the galaxies that would be destroyed if they were ever to return. What are a few million people in the total history of the universe? "You can't allow it," Bernice said to the doctor. The doctor looked powerless. "I wish I could do something," he said, appalled. "You can, Doctor. You must disarm the bomb," Bernice replied. "I can't." "Doctor!" She stared at him. "No." He shook his head. "It was your idea that we visited this planet. You remembered the disappearance of the entire system. It has already happened. There's nothing we can do. We're part of history. We can't change it." Kopion continued. "All knowledge of the Althosian system will be wiped from the Matrix. The truth is too dangerous." They walked to the space station. They were strangely quiet. Bernice was seething with anger. Her friend must be able to prevent this genocide. The doctor tried to explain, in his usual confused way, what had gone on over the last 4 days, and why he couldn't interfere. But she didn't understand. She understood that it was something about the return of monsters that had attacked their universe thousands of years ago, when the people of Gallifrey had fought a long, bloody war. She had been introduced to Blake, who rambled on about the eternal conflict between the forces of good and evil. But it didn't make sense to her. For once, she knew the Doctor had not been all-knowing, that even with his great age and status as a Time Lord, he had been as confused as her. He looked sad, like a child who had found a penny but lost a pound. He seemed to want to say something, but it was lost and never said. The ancient Gallifreyan had looked at the Doctor. Those burning eyes had stared at him. "Don't get in my way again," Kopion said. "If we meet again, I will kill you. Don't interfere in my work. It goes on."